challenges tend to sort of be based on having a disadvantage or being an underdog in some way. And what's interesting about this is that it taps into our visceral reaction to when we think something is unfair. One of the really interesting things about sort of when we perceive something to be unfair is that it does a very rare thing. It makes us act. And a couple of good examples of this is, kind of the hundreds of thousands of people who move their bank account, something that you typically might do once or twice in your life, when the bank started, in the US, started charging a $5 a month fee for owning a debit card. Another example, of course, is Netflix, when they sort of were perceived to have got to a level of unfair pricing. And Netflix before this was a much loved brand. I mean, it would have taken a lot for people to move away. Yet I think about 800,000 people moved from Netflix in the space of a quarter. And what's behind this is that when people feel unfair, you really have to resolve that feeling. And it's kind of interesting because when you look at what happens in the brain when you put somebody in a condition which they think is unfair, is that you see activity in the anterior insula. And this is the part of the brain which also is activated in situations which create fear and disgust and anger. So people feeling that something is unfair are very, very motivated to stop that feeling, and they will take action to do so. And so this is a very interesting thing because, as I said, it does really drive behavior. It's one of the few things that do. You can give people rational information about things and they will not act. You can tell people, that what they're doing is bad for them, will kill them. It will not make them stop it. But if you make people feel they've been subject to unfairness, they will do something about it. It's something I came across quite recently in some work we were doing with Georgetown University's Institute for Consumer Research. And Neeru Paharia is a professor there, and she's done some really interesting stuff on underdogs and why we like underdogs, and looked at kind of given brands' underdog narratives and seen how people respond to them. And as a preliminary to this, she actually did some research to find out how people felt about their own underdog narrative, and her conclusion was from that research that actually we all feel we're underdogs. We tend to sort of feel, even if we have advantages, we will see them as disadvantages in our road to getting on in life. And a couple of other things that were interesting came out of this research was that, first of all, not just do we see ourselves as underdogs, but we then identify with the underdog narrative of a brand. They seem to be for us, about us. And when she looked at sort of, brands with underdog biographies or narratives versus brands that didn't, she saw something really interesting, which was that people tended to buy the underdog brands for themselves, but weren't so likely to buy them for other people. An indication which is this is about us and an expression of us rather than something that might be so much about how we see others. So I think it's a really interesting that challenges may be interesting to us because they seem to speak to us more directly. They are brands for us rather than brands for other people.